Welcome to Break the Box, a podcast at the intersection of faith, entrepreneurship, and creativity. I'm your host, Jake Starkey. The goal of this podcast is to tell the story of other Christian entrepreneurs and creatives and encourage you to break out of whatever box is holding you back. If you're a first-time listener, I encourage you to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, Season 2 is coming soon, and we're excited to bring more of these to you on a regular basis. I'm excited to have pastor, author, and book publisher Casey Cease on the podcast to discuss his path to faith, how he uses his time, and a ton of resources for entrepreneurs and creatives. Here's my conversation with Casey Cease. Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, Season 2 is coming soon, and we're excited to bring more of these to you on a regular basis. I'm excited to have pastor, author, and book publisher Casey Cease on the podcast to discuss his path to faith, how he uses his time, and a ton of resources for entrepreneurs and creatives. Here's my conversation with Casey Cease. Thank you so much, Casey, for joining us. You are two things at the moment. You are a pastor for your church, and you are a publisher.
I am.
What led you to that? What's kind of your background?
Yeah, man. So the irony is I'm a dyslexic publisher that relearned how to read when I was 22 years old, and I didn't really care for books. My favorite book, the only book I really read besides Calvin and Hobbes, was Jelly Belly, which was a children's book about a kid that goes to fat camp and cheats his whole way through, then gets home and gets inspired to go lose weight and earns a trip. Well, I don't want to be a spoiler alert for all you listening who are going to go read Jelly Belly, but he ends up being able to go because he works hard and runs hard and everything else. And so always inspired me. I didn't grow up in church. I went on and off as a kid and struggled a lot with anxiety and depression. I think some of it was just the household I grew up in was pretty stressful. My dad was a hard worker, entrepreneur, a lawyer, and so we didn't really go to church. We went some. My parents had some spiritual encounters growing up, but I kind of missed it. And got into high school. I went from Alief, Texas, which is kind of the hood, to Sugarland, Texas, which was a big switch. Oh, yeah. Still struggling with anxiety and depression, undiagnosed ADD and dyslexic, and started partying in high school, really into girls, and fast forward a bit, I got in a car crash the summer after my junior year of high school that resulted in the death of a friend of mine. I had been at a party and got really upset. My girlfriend and I, a year and a half, had just broken up recently, and a lot of things have been going on. And I was at the place as a non-believer where I was around people all the time, but I always felt so alone that whatever relationships I was engaging in weren't really satisfying, and it was just empty. And so following that, my friend's parents came to see me. I was in a mental hospital on suicide watch, and my friend's parents came to see me, and they said, "Casey, we want you to know that we are Christians and that we forgive you, and we don't want you to hurt yourself." And so that got me thinking, because that was really strange to me. Like, okay, you forgive me, but what? What's the catch? Yeah, exactly. And so I got out, started going to church, trying to be a good person, trying to be religious. I'm not good at either of those things on my own. And Mom gave me a student Bible. I started reading about how Jesus would hang out with broken, messed up people. And I began to realize that Jesus wasn't waiting for me to get my act together. He was there for me to trust. And at the age of 17, I trusted Jesus and graduated high school. A few days later, went to court, pled no contest to 4th-degree stage L felony and negligent homicide. I was on probation 5 years. I had a breathalyzer in my car, and so that's how I started speaking to kids, teenagers. As a teenager, I asked if I could talk to some kids as a part of my probation. The judge said I could do a few. But I got the front page of the Houston Chronicle. They did a follow-up story a year later. And so I went from speaking a lot around here to national opportunities by the time I was 18 and a half years old. And so fast forward to even more, did a youth internship at the church I was at. I had been an entrepreneur since I was 13, started a DJ company when I was 13 years old. My dad gave me some seed money, got me some gear. Wow. And I guess my strength's really marketing and sales. And I like to throw good parties. And so by the time I was 14 years old, man, I was DJing dances at middle schools and junior highs that my parents would have to drive me to, but I could afford to undercharge everybody else. And so I was getting like $250 a weekend and DJing. And by the end of my freshman year of high school, I had 2 rigs running. But my other 14-year-old fellow friends did not have the same work ethic I did. And so they kept leaving stage and going to dance with the girls instead of running the party. And so it was pretty overwhelming. And so I backed off that for a few years. Always had entrepreneurial bent. Submitted to the call of ministry in fall of 1999. I was 21 years old. Shifted gears from a business degree at University of Houston to psychology degree, and ended up going to Southwestern Seminary for my master's of divinity, and I took 6 long years there. So I was actually in college and post-grad longer than I was in first through 12th. So 12 and a half years. I tell people I was marinating. I almost dropped out of college, actually, but my dad, being a former military and attorney, he's like, no, you're not. So went to doctor, relearned how to read, and went there. So got in ministry, started speaking. So when people ask me, well, how do I start speaking like you did? I'm like, don't do it the way I did. I don't advise a felony charge or anything like that. That's not a good idea. But, from there, just my passion for Christ and my desire to see people know him grew. I started a nonprofit organization when I was 22 called KCC Outreach because I wanted to be Billy Graham. But then it was very clear I didn't have the same anointing. And so a few years later, I changed it to Transform Ministries, which was a 501c3, still is, that I've helped start a lot of other nonprofits through as like an incubator. And so, and also covers my speaking. I still do speaking, all that. So got into church planting 2002. And in 2006, we had our daughter Braylon. And my wife was a teacher and wanted to stay home. So one of my mentors had just self-published a book with a Christian self-publishing company, had such a horrible experience that he was so mad that he was going to start his own company. But he got promoted at work. And so he takes me to Chick-fil-A one Saturday morning. Tell me, like, Chick-fil-A, bro, Christian, the gospel chicken, my friend and I call it. And he started telling me about this publishing company he was going to do. I was sitting here thinking, like, that's fine, but why are you telling me this? I don't want to write. And at the end of the conversation, he said, so all that to say, I want you to have it. And I'm going to give you a little bit of money, and I think you could do something.
Oh, wow.
And it blew me away. I had no idea. And so it fell into my lap. I had known I wanted to write my story into book form. But I also knew that there aren't a ton of traditional publishers at the time that would take personal testimonies unless I was speaking to masses and things like that. And so started fumbling around the first few years, and then God providentially brought a guy named John Bisagno that we published, who was a former head pastor of Houston's First Baptist. And then he introduced us to Bum Phillips, a former head coach of the Houston Oilers. Yeah. And so we went to this little rinky-dink publisher that was in my spare bedroom at my house to having international distribution because of a few people God placed in our lives.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And so the last few years leading up to now, things have radically changed for our company because we got to a point where we were like, either we're going to scale up or we're going to close. Because we just realized that we were finally onto something that met a need for people, and so we want to really scale up. And so that's where we find ourselves today. So it's probably much longer than you wanted to hear, but it's a crazy journey to where I am today. Having been involved in church planting, 5 years in Sugar Land with Crossbridge Church, they sent us to Brenham where we helped plant Redeemer in Brenham. And then I came out here as a lead pastor, founding pastor of the Woodlands Magnolia area to plant Christ Community Church. And I intentionally started and maintain a bivocational, and sometimes I joke, trivocational view of ministry on purpose.
Yeah. Well, I like the way that you're using your day job, whatever you want to call it, the book publishing, as an avenue for further outreach.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you balance the two of those?
Yeah.
Because obviously you know that every Sunday there's going to be another service.
Oh, man, it's like a new term paper. And
then I see you on Facebook, and it's I'm going over here, and you're obviously back on the weekends, but you're doing a lot of traveling. How do you manage those responsibilities?
I read this.
We'll get into how you handle the responsibilities of doing that with a family.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. I'm not naturally organized, but I appreciate organization. I'm not sure if that makes tons of sense. It may sound like an oxymoron, but
it actually does.
Yeah,
I understand.
I really love processes. The challenge is I'm not the best at slowing down to build them out. And so a couple things. I always plan and staff and position for where I want to go, not where I am, which is backwards for a lot of people. And I understand that not everybody has that risk tolerance to be able to move that direction. But so, for instance, like a normal week for me is I usually work 6 days and take one hard day off on a Saturday. But I'm now getting a bit more flexible. Like, for instance, Friday afternoon with you here, this is fun for me. Like, this doesn't feel like work. Right. I love talking about gospel and business and all those things. And so I really, a few things I do now. I have an assistant that helps me process emails, scheduling. I leverage technology, so Trello, Calendly. I leverage, Slack with my teams, both at church and business. And so, we use technology well. I set boundaries of what I'll do and what I will not do. And I continuously each year ask the question, what 1 to 3 things can I do in this organization to provide the most value? So it's kind of like the Pareto principle, 80-20. 20% of what we do brings 80% of the results. And I think for the most part, it works well. There are seasons where, especially on church stuff, I'm out counseling too much or whatever. And so what we're doing is building out with a professional counselor a center for our church folks to get the proper marriage care that they need.
So kind of what you were talking about reminds me of something I've heard Andy Stanley say, and he might not have been the first one, but I heard it from him. So about only doing what only you can do.
Yep.
It sounds like you take that principle on as well. And
well, as an entrepreneur and a capitalist, right, our job is to create jobs.
Yeah.
And sure, there's a lot I can do, but when I this sounds crazy, like I do tons of stuff. There really is a method to the madness. I also coach business owners and primarily bivocational ministry leaders. But I've got some other Christian business owners I'm working with. And one thing I tell them is make a list of what you're doing and then put a number value to it. $8 an hour, $12 an hour, $25 an hour, $50 an hour, $100 an hour, $1,000 an hour. And start sitting there with how you use your time, because I think most entrepreneurs and pastors, especially church planters, keep themselves busy with things are not really doing much value, but feel a need to justify the expense of their time and presence.
Yes, I agree. I think that a lot of people, myself included, that will find little things to do that will keep us from doing the things that we need to do.
Bro, I kill it at $8 an hour tasks, man.
Yeah. I
can run a copy like a beast.
Exactly.
Yes.
Or I'll have to put together a letter or something.
Yeah.
But if I can move the margins and I'll put a logo up there.
Oh man, back when I was fundraising a ton, I really thought that the layout was going to be what bumped them up another 50.
Exactly.
That never came back. It
didn't?
No,
okay.
It didn't come back that way.
Take the logo off.
So, I think there's that nature, man, where you do kind of this continual review and look at value and have that honest assessment. That's why I've enjoyed having a business coach. I also have a pastor coach who coaches my wife and I. And I think coaching is super important on finding that balance with work and ministry and forcing other people, right? Because Ephesians 4 talks about it's important for a pastor to understand our job is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And I think too many pastors thrive at doing deacon work rather than presbyteros, episkopos, overseer work, where we're equipping others to do the work and making sure it's done well. There are certainly weeks I am out of balance, but more and more, as I've been at this church now 6 years, I really feel like we're striking a good balance, and I've really established a great team both in the company and in our church.
Yeah. So now let's add the third layer there, which is family.
Sure.
Yeah. You said you have a wife and a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And
I have 2 daughters now.
2 daughters.
Yeah, and a dog.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
With being an entrepreneur, I know that it seems like 60-hour weeks are probably normal.
Yeah.
In that respect, and then lay on
yeah.
church and the mental preparation goes with that. That sometimes I can see how people would think you're not actually preparing when you are, reading or just sitting thinking.
Yeah.
You're actually working.
So I block Tuesdays I have a firm boundary on Tuesdays where I'm studying and prepping for my sermons the weeks I'm preaching. The weeks I'm not preaching, I'm preparing or working on the vision for the church or planning out a preaching calendar, things like that. So I think preparation, I think a lot of times people work a lot without doing much work at all. And I pay people, my employees, especially my business, understand their first job is to work on my business. Because the more they improve my business, the better experience our authors and clients are going to have.
Hey, I wanted to take a quick moment and tell you a little bit about Battle Cry Revival Marketing, the producer of this podcast. We believe that when businesses have quality marketing, it gives business owners the freedom to focus on what they do best. We design websites, produce videos, and create marketing materials to help our clients grow their business. Find out more at battlecryrevival.com. Now back to the show. Now back to the show. we've talked about church
Mm-hmm.
and a little bit about business. Let's talk a little bit more about business. And you say you kind of had the publishing company drop in your lap to a certain extent.
Yeah.
How did you know that that was something that you're supposed to do, right? You hear different opportunities that come up. I have friends that will say, it's a great idea. And I know how I try and seek it out, but how did you know, all right, yeah, this is.
Well, since I'm a marketing and sales guy, I always think like, do people want what you want to do? And so there's a book called Lean Startup that talks about creating kind of a template. I think even now with the advent of Kickstarter, Indiegogo, or pre-orders or something like that, like so several of our authors, we coach them through setting up a Kickstarter campaign. One, it helps with pre-sales, and two, it proves the concept, right? So that they're not investing a lot of time and resources into producing a book that no one wants. And so, I with the publishing thing, I knew people wanted to be published because Create Space was concept at the time, and people want to publish books. People have stories they'd like to tell. But over the years, as we've grown and evolved as an organization, we've learned that people need help in all stages of publishing, including myself when I did my first book. So that's why last year we started our own writing department, because I've done 2 versions of my book, Tragedy to Truth, and the current version still has some typos in it, even though it had then seen 4 editors plus another proofer. And so I finally said, enough's enough. I'm going to manage our editing process for our authors. Hired a full-time editor with a master's degree with a theological background, and she then interviews and trains and screens and makes sure all of our editors now are ready to write. Wow. Because I think your book should be as excellent as possible, but there's tons of grace. Humans are involved. I was reading one book by a well-known author recently, and in the intro there's a typo. So it still happens, but so it's grown based on need and feedback. And so what I tell entrepreneurs, and here's the deal, it's like, look, if you think of Psalm 23 in regards to our walk with God, right? People only think of Psalm 23 as a funeral, like when you die or whatever, right? But it's really more about living than it is dying, because it talks about how the Lord is our shepherd, we shall not be in want. He makes me to lie down, right? And so in his sovereign and providential care, him making us to lie down, there's times where he forces rest, whether it's through burnout or sickness or, whatever. But I always tell Christians, if it's true that his rod and his staff comfort me, we understand the differences. One's for rebuke and correction, and one's for prodding on and pushing. And so if I'm really walking with God, I can't go that far away. If I'm obeying his scripture, if I'm trying to honor Christ, and if I'm walking in biblical community with other believers, then we have luxury and liberty to risk a bit, right? We should be making the wisest risks and taking the biggest chances and graciously failing and getting back up, and understanding that according to the gospel, true failure is refusal to learn and repent from previous mistakes, right? It's not making the mistake or failing. It's I'm going to learn from it, grow from it, and move on. And so for believers, I think we should have the most innovative businesses. I think we should have the most helpful services. Yeah. I think we should be the least likely to get sucked into these schemes that just help us get rich quick. It's like snake oil. And that's really one of my underlying things is whether it's in church or in business or whatever, and I don't really bifurcate, like, well, that's just business. You're Christian, sure, yeah. Right? And no, I'm a Christian in business as well. Is it helpful? That's a question. It's one of the books I'm writing called Be Helpful, The Importance of Being More Than Just Right. Right. That was inspired from our election process and Facebook, watching people be foolish. But that's the hardest. Christians should be coming not just to make a buck, but to do things that add value right now to organizations, and do so in a way that is helpful and life-giving.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend, and we were talking about this, and the idea that at one time Christians were the most creative. Cathedrals are beautiful, designed by Christians for the worship of God, and the fact that some of these cathedrals you can go and sit down and just look around and feel the presence of God because of the way it's designed, the art.
Those were built, it seems, for a living God.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And that's something that I feel like we've lost.
I think so. And I think even beyond that, you think of like John 13:35. They will know that you are my disciples by the way that you love one another. Yeah. And we're so quick to fight everybody, especially in the Baptistic circles. Yeah. So I think, as far as innovative business for Christians, church planting is an entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yes.
Very much so. Now, the point isn't to harvest money, although money is a resource. And I'd love to get on the show sometime and talk about money. I don't want to go too far off on my ADHD to take us on another rabbit trail, but just the view of money is in a nutshell, I'll give it to you. I deal with some very wealthy people, and I tell them, for you to bow down to money is like going into your garage, pulling out the gas can and bowing down and worshiping it, because all money is created to do is act as a fuel, right?
Exactly.
And without that fuel, the engine won't run. Yeah. And so there is money is not money is the root of all. No, money is a root, and really the love of money.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The love of money. Right. Because if it hadn't been for the generosity of people in my life, there's no way I'd be where I was today.
Exactly.
Right. And so I think the tension we find in entrepreneurship and business with Christian folks is, hey, we got to go back and, as Simon Sinek says, start with why.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things too is I see a lot of people who want to start a business and are Christians, and their goal is to get rich. And obviously, if you're in a business, you don't want to lose money. Right. But there's still, I think, the process by which we do that should set an example.
I think so as well. I mean, getting rich and building wealth, I think, are a little bit different. I think getting rich is so I can have and consume. Mm-hmm. Building wealth is that I can have a foundation to build a legacy of generosity from now and forevermore, to add more value, to be more generous, to build kingdom. And man, I can't tell you how many people I know. Money is a horrible god.
Yes, it is.
It's a horrible god. It will abandon you every time, and you'll always want more of it. Yes. And it will never satisfy. And so, looking at finances in business, right? Again, the motivation for business. Yeah, we want to make $1, but why?
Yeah, exactly. And the how.
Sure.
There's plenty of ways to make money that are not God honoring, and
Right. If the way you make money is leveraging relationships to such an extent that those people no longer feel cared for by you, then you've missed the boat.
Yeah.
If you create a service or a product that helps people, they'll thank you for it. I heard someone say recently, people hate being sold, but they love to buy.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And so selling is helping people to see the value of what you're bringing, to connect it to a need that they have, and then to pull them into the product.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you publish a lot of books. I've seen. Interviewed Jason for the show.
Yeah.
Jason Crandall, by the way. And what's your process?
Yeah.
In the sense of not just the process of working with the author, but these are people that want to publish their own book and then come to you, or are you seeking them out? I mean, or both?
Both, maybe. And really.
Sure.
And a lot of like Pastor Jason or Dr. Jason Crandall, Dr. Jason. We've known each other for years, and I think people have been suspiciously watching us. I mean, we're a 10-year-old overnight success, so you gotta love that, yeah. But realizing that, publishing is changing. So traditional publishing now, you get an agent if they'll pick you up, and then if you have a large enough platform, they'll sign you, and then you get a small advance royalty and lose the rights to your books, and then you're going to wait 18 to 24 months before your book comes out. Okay, so that's one, and that may be feasible for some folks. There's not a time crunch on their title. They're well known. It's something else. Then you have the self-publishing arm that is pretty inexpensive or even free, depending on how scrappy you are, but you're all by yourself. And you're having to figure a ton out, because it's way more than just, I'm going to get a Word document and I'm going to format it on CreateSpace and put a cover on it and people are going to buy it. Well, first of all, no, they won't. Yeah. And so what we found is okay, how can people ask me all the time, well, is Lucid Books a publishing company? I say, well, we're known as that. Lucid Books is a service company, and we serve writers, authors, pastors, and business owners by helping them capture their ideas in a very creative and constructive manner, organizing it, editing it, and then producing it and then distributing it while we help them promote it. And so we're helping them along the ways capture that. Our ideal author isn't someone who's at home and doesn't want to work hard for anything and has an idea and they write it down and they think it's going to be the next Shaq, right? We're looking for the entrepreneur, the Christian leader, the blogger, the speaker, the pastor, the innovator, the leader, who is willing to admit what they're great at, and most likely it's their idea. even more than their writing. And that's why we've created unique writing services like our business book deal, where we do an interview basis and then transcribe and we edit and write it for business owners. Or sermon to book, where we take a sermon series, get the notes in audio, and transcribe it, and then truly edit it, not just slap it into a binding, but make it actually sound like a real book. And so we've come up with innovative processes to help them. And so most people, when they come to our website, lucidbookspublishing.com or lucidbooks.net, both of them work. You can start by downloading a free writing tips checklist. And then we have a writing tips. We have a book writing blueprint. We also have another service for people who are like for me, I'm going this summer to work on my next project. I have 2 projects I'm working on, but one for my church. And so I'm going to use our service called the Book Writing Roadmap Service, where I work with a professional editor and they help me get organized, get everything in order, and then coach me along the way to maximize my time. So when I'm writing, I'm not just trying to figure things out.
Right.
And so we've offered those smaller services to help people get going. But then we have a phenomenal team of editors, proofers. We have great designers. And I was trying to hit you up, see if your company will design for me a little bit. And we have international distribution now, ebooks, and we're now rolling into audiobooks as well. And so there's a lot of ways that we come alongside and help, and then we come up with unique strategies for book promotion and marketing. And we look to educate our authors so that next time around they may not need the book writing roadmap service or as much marketing help, because they have a vision, and that's great. And some of our authors have gotten invited to go with larger publishers. Some have opted to stay with us because they get better royalties with us. Mm-hmm. But some, they want that under their belt. Yeah. Great, praise God, let them go.
Well, it seems to me that I'm sure you've experienced it, it does seem to me that while they might not need your services for one piece, then they understand what you bring to the table and might want to keep you for additional piece or this or that.
And here's the deal, man. The majority of our authors aren't just authors. Right. They do other things. And so a realtor that we worked with in Central Texas credits $275,000 of revenue for himself from his book he wrote on and sent out free to landowners in the area. That has built and snowballed, and he's one of the top now realtors in Central Texas. Wow. Right? Yeah. And so for him, he's not calling me saying, hey man, I'm going to go on a writing retreat and do all this stuff. He's like, hey, I got this idea I'm working on, boom, boom, boom. What can you do to help me out? And I say, how much time do you have? He's like, I got 20 hours to give this. Well, we have a solution for that. For my own book, Tragedy to Truth, I raised $8,800 on Kickstarter, even though I own the company, because I wanted to build momentum. Raised another $4,000 through my nonprofit, and through my second edition, I've paid over $15,000 for my project. People are like, "Oh, that's so much money." It is, and people are like, "Well, did you make that back in book sales?" Maybe now I have, but we give a free copy away to everyone that visits my church, and I've made substantially more than that through speaking honorariums since the book's come out.
And it also seems to me that you're under the belief, which I agree with, of the long tail.
Absolutely.
That once it's out there, it's out there.
It's out, man.
20 years from now, 30 years from now, people can still find it, still.
Well, it's a legacy builder for me, but also a momentum builder in that I have other things to say. And so you capture kind of a message in your life and you put it out, or capture something for your business and you put it out there and you add value. We've worked with an architect in Central Texas as well, and she wrote a book called Church Buildings. And it's basically, she gives away almost everything she knows about architecture, project planning, and everything else to help churches. But guess what? She's already booked 1 or 2 projects because people trust her from the content of her book.
Yes.
Right? Which will more than pay for the project itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a win-win scenario, and that's how we think strategically to help people out.
Man, there's a lot of good resources here. I would encourage anyone who's interested to definitely check out the website. I've signed up for the newsletter, and I was telling you earlier, I just got an email this morning about it, actually, or
yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday about it.
11 a.m.
And so check out their website. Also, kind of not in closing, but there's certain questions that we ask everyone. One, what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah. So you asked me before about my family, how I balance all that before, and I didn't answer that much. My wife is my best friend. My 2 girls, I love them. I value family very highly. I don't always do the best at blocking time with them. But next to my motivation to really strive to glorify God in all things, it's to protect, provide, lead, and set example for my family. And I'm growing through that. I'm learning through that. I really, after my crash, I said I'm going to give the rest of my life to honor Jesus and to help people. That's what I want to do. That's, at the end of the day, Casey wants to be helpful, period. I just spoke of myself in the third person, so slightly narcissistic at times as well, I guess. But get out in the morning. It really is so much tragedy in that crash, but one thing it served me is it was like a midlife crisis at 17, reevaluate what's really important.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to waste any time while I'm here. So that gets me out of bed. Sometimes I stay in bed, like Tuesday after Easter. I had to get up Monday to help my wife with some stuff and do some work. Tuesday I slept in. So some days I stay in bed for Jesus.
What would you say to someone who comes to you and says, I have an idea, whether it's for a book or a
Yeah.
business, where do I begin?
Sure. I think that's the first step. I have an idea. Great. I have lots of ideas, and so I heard how Walt Disney's brother Roy eventually built a drawer for him to put his ideas in, and so I use Trello for my ideas because I overwhelm people with my ideas. But if you have an idea, what I would do is I wouldn't. What everyone does is they do it so backwards. They're like, I'm going to go build a website and get a logo and get a business card. And well, first, no, write an email to 10 people you know who might be interested in what your idea is and see if they're interested. Hey, I'm thinking about offering the service that goes and picks up groceries for you. Blah 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 blah. And would that be of interest? Be honest. Don't just send it to your mom because, oh, Pookie, that's wonderful. But send it to, first get encouragement and then send it to people who might be skeptic and then send it to naysayers. But I'd start that way. And then if you want to test it out, set up PayPal and a WordPress landing page and either let people pre-order it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I sold my first book deal before I knew how to use Photoshop. And so I quickly learned how to outsource because of that, because Photoshop's very hard. So I appreciate what you do.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said there is important too, in that when I was putting together all this, whatever this is, I was again stuck in the minutia of, well, let me make a list of what to do for the website, and then, I'll eventually get to this podcast. And so I agree with you. It's very important that, for example, me, I want to make a podcast. I need to make the podcast and then iterate the other stuff versus doing it.
Absolutely. Hey, man, we hate rejection. We don't want to fail. And when we remember that the story, as a follower of Jesus, we know how the story ends. There's really no such thing as failure, but not doing anything. Inactivity is the most horrible way that a Christian, I think, can fail, is by doing nothing. Try stuff. Hey, church planting, I've been like a perpetual seventh grade, getting dumped all the time in church planting. It's been good for me. And I think here's what I would do. Tell someone else is like, whatever you end up doing, don't let that be your identity, because it's a horrible God. Your identity, if you're a follower of Christ, is found in Christ. Victory is yours. Try stuff. Admit failure. Don't be stubborn about it. Adjust. Seek counsel. But do something. I have a guy that's like starting a pressure washing company. And so I was like, come pressure wash for me. Because I did that back when I was helping church plant in Brenham. I know what it is. I know how hard it can be, but it's worth it. So some ideas are bad too. Like, you're going to have a bunch of bad ideas.
Yes.
I won't even say one of the blog ideas I had on here because it's so embarrassing. But my wife is my best friend, and she and I are pretty opposite. And so I'll take ideas all the time. And if she's actually like, that might actually work, then I know we're on something.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, this one, we don't have a whole lot of time for.
Mm-hmm.
What are some books you recommend? As a book publisher.
Sure. On the business side, we have one called Entre Balance and one called Entre Business Entre Business might be, is that Ramsey? I don't know. Well, we have to, by Jared Pollock, and Jared's my business coach. And it's kind of a Patrick Lencioni type of writing, kind of a fable with
right.
points and stuff like that. Really helpful. E-Myth Revisited is a staple that when I coach people on how to build systems around your business and identifying different roles. I think the 4-Hour Work Week, the $100 Startup are good and helpful to think through. Less Doing by Ari Meisel was actually very helpful for me. Less Doing, More Living is what it's called, and they have a company with some VAs that we're trying out right now, so I can keep you posted on how we like that. As far as faith and work goes, Tim Challies has a great productivity book, Do More Better, and that was pretty helpful. I moved from Todoist over to Trello, but overall I think it's very helpful. I love the Entrepreneur Roller Coaster. I read it several times a year. because it's short, and I'll go back and read my highlights and stuff, and it connects on a real heart level. So those are some of the ones I would recommend.
Fantastic. And finally, how can people reach out to you?
Yeah. You can find me on Twitter at Casey Cease. You can find me on Facebook, wait for it, Casey Cease. You can go to caseycease.com. That's where I'm going to start blogging again now that I've put this out there. I haven't in a while, but intend to start writing again. lucidbookspublishing.com, LUCID publishing.com. We also still own lucidbooks.net, and you can find more information about the services we offer.
Thanks for tuning in. Break the Box is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to help us out, a review would be greatly appreciated and is honestly the best way to help the podcast be heard by others. This podcast is produced by Battle Cry Revival Marketing and hosted by Jake Starkey. For show notes, visit battlecryrevival.com/podcast.